Welcome, everybody. I'm Ellen Clegg. I am a longtime journalist in Boston. I worked at the Boston Globe for 37 years. I was editorial page editor. And I left daily journalism in 2018 to work on a book with Dan Kennedy, What Works in Community News. We profiled 9 successful, thriving, independent news outlets all across the country. I'm also a faculty associate here at Northeastern.
And I'm Dan Kennedy, and like Ellen, I'm a longtime journalist. I spent much of my career at the late lamented Boston Phoenix. And in addition to writing a book with Ellen, she and I also host a podcast, What Works, the Future of Local News, on which we interview entrepreneurs and thought leaders. I'm a professor in the School of Journalism. So with that, let's introduce our great panelists.
And we're going to introduce panelists, and then they will talk to tell you more about them and their work. I want to start with Sean McLaughlin. He's the Vice President of News for Graham Media Group, which owns media hubs in 6 local markets across the nation. And before coming to Graham in 2024, he oversaw local news for 41 local news operations at Scripps. Sean leads efforts to transform local news products to meet complicated needs of all audiences in 2025 on all platforms. Sean focuses on technical transformation, AI incorporation, community immersion, and, of course, journalistic excellence. He got into the business in 1994 as an anchor and reporter in Austin, Minnesota, my home state, and worked as a news director at local stations for 15 years. Sean, do you want to?
Yeah, this is a topic I have a lot of passion about. I mean, I got into the business as a reporter, and the way I describe it, I always look at things through the lens of a reporter. I'm very outspoken on the need to transform in local news right now on the TV side because, we still have relative audience. Now, it's not what it was even 3-4 years ago. I mean, we're definitely in the process of audience loss, but I still think we're at a point in time where we can save it. But unfortunately, what I see happening in the industry, and I think is going to continue, is that we are focusing on everything except the journalism side. And by that, I mean we focus on the presentation, how it looks, how the anchors are presenting it, a lot of the cosmetic part. And what I see is the number of journalists per newsroom continues to decline at a time where I think the role of local journalism has never been more important. So I'm sure we'll get more specific into this, but I have a lot of strong opinions, and I look forward to sharing them with you today.
So it is my task to introduce Evie Kintzer. Evie is GBH's Vice President of Strategy and Business Development, where she's responsible for driving growth strategies for GBH's content across multiple platforms and identifying new business opportunities in support of GBH's educational mission. A 35-year veteran of GBH, Evie spent her first 14 years as a staff attorney negotiating production agreements for Nova, Frontline, American Experience, and children's series such as Arthur, before moving to strategy, where she identified emerging digital opportunities for GBH's local and national projects.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for coming, Evie.
Nice to be here. I come at this from a different perspective than the journalists on the panel because I come from a legal background, so I think a lot about how can we move forward and how can we grow and how can we be sustainable and how can we keep public media going for another 75 years. And as Sean just said, we're in a transformational period. So while we've seen audiences declining on traditional linear television and broadcast, we still make most of our money there. And we also have a lot of audiences because most of our audiences are older. So the problem is that we need to be building new audiences, and those audiences are not going to watch us, obviously, on linear television. Most of you probably don't. So we see all this fragmented media environment in the digital platforms, like you all know, because you probably spend your day on various different platforms, devices, where you move from place to place. And the question is, where is there ever going to be a business model that is ever going to be able to grow with the dimes that you're getting, or the pennies, on each of these different platforms? And that's what we're struggling with. So over the last several years, we've started a process where we've talked to our staffs about how are we going to keep our core audiences on the broadcast networks, the radio and television, and how are we going to grow on the digital platforms? Because the money is still with television, but the audiences are going to be growing increasingly on the digital platforms. And that's what we've been doing. And the experimentation that we've been doing has really shown that there's an audience there for our high-quality narrative-driven storytelling. And that's pretty exciting. So I think, as much as it's very scary and sad to see these numbers down, it's an amazing opportunity to figure out how we're going to succeed in this new digital space.
And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Dan Lothian, a colleague of Evie's at GBH, where he's editor-in-chief of two operations, The World, a radio program that covers international news, and GBH News, which is the local news division that encompasses radio, digital, and TV. He's also a colleague of ours here at Northeastern. He's a professor of the practice in the School of Journalism. Dan is a nationally recognized award-winning journalist with more than 30 years of experience covering national and international news, and is a former White House correspondent for CNN. That's why you'll recognize his voice.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Every time I hear something like 30...
I just want to give you a mic so you get
sure.
to make sure we hear.
Every time that I hear something like, over 30 years, I remember how when I first started in the business and they were looking for people with experience of 5 years, and how daunting that was. Oh, I have to get like 5 years experience before I can work there, and now here I am years later, and I'm the veteran who's been around for a while. But I came at this back in the day with a real interest in engineering, actually. That's kind of where it all started. I had a couple of dreams as a kid. One was to work for the FCC. And then, the other was to own a lot of radio stations. That was the pathway, I thought, rooted in radio, and we probably will get a chance to talk a little bit about this, but I always found radio as this intriguing opportunity to be able to sit behind a microphone and have a conversation with people. You didn't have to see them, but there's the imagination of your audience, and they didn't know that you were young and that you could still have a conversation with them. So I did, thinking of fixing things all the time, but also as I was inching into the editorial part of it on radio, and eventually, over the years, going off to grad school and then ending up in local television, network TV, and now on this side of it in management. The thing throughout that transition, I touched a lot of different things. So got a good understanding of what happens in engineering, a good understanding of what happens in radio, in TV, and digital, even in the early days of building out a website, did work there. And so those were pieces of building this bigger picture that allows me, I think, to see into a lot of different aspects of what we're doing and thinking about how can we do it differently. And so what I spend a lot of time thinking about these days is, yes, we have all the things we talked about here. We have to find new and innovative ways to use the technologies that are here and the technologies that are coming in the very near future. But I also talk a lot to my staff about how can we use the storytelling that we've always done in a different way. So if you have TV packages and you put them together this way, do we always have to do it that way? Radio packages were always done this way. Shows were always structured this way. So I'm speaking from an editorial standpoint, right? How can we still engage the audience with the old traditional ways of storytelling, but trying something a little different? And so yes, we have to use we have to use YouTube, we have to do social media. AI is a big part of, or an increasing part of what we do. But at the end of the day, it's about storytelling. And how can we be innovative and tell stories in a different way? And so all of the things that I've picked up along my career, I think has helped me to push my team to try to do it differently, and we're finding some success.
Terrific. Well, Ellen and I have prepared a bunch of questions, but we're also going to make sure that there's ample opportunity for you to get involved in the conversation as well. So I'd like to begin with a question asking all three of you to define what local news means for a TV station. Now, Ellen and I mainly focus on hyperlocal news, but TV can't cover what's going on with the Bedford Planning Board or the Arlington School Committee. TV is more regional. So where do you draw the line? And are there innovative ways that TV news can get down to that hyperlocal level? And I'm not sure how we want to do this. Maybe left to right, starting with Dan.
Yeah, I think, boy, again, I grew up at a time when TV, you didn't have a lot of competition. So you had a few channels, and I was talking about this the other day, you had to actually get up out of your chair to go and switch to the few channels that you had. No. So yeah, there wasn't that clicker, right? And so you didn't have to, what was there was what was there, and that's what you connected with. I think, local TV and how we cover the stories is still the way that it's always been covered, and I think that's part of the problem. I look at some of the newscasts today, and I think I could pretty much say those stories as they are airing. It's like, yeah, I know how to, it's the formula. It's the way that you do it. You try to go as deep as you can in 1 minute and 45 seconds. And I think that has been and will continue to be a challenge. And so the question is, how do you get deeper than that? And how do you provide something that an audience will truly find engaging? And I think, for us, it's making sure that you have a mix of a lot of different types of storytelling. So you have to give the quick hits, as we like to call it, those short, headlines, if you will, that you need to know before you head out to work that day, or when you come back in the evening. But we also have to invest in some of the meaningful long-form reporting. And I don't think that you can get away with just doing the quick hits and moving on. And I think despite what younger audiences will say that, oh, well, you'll hear sometimes, young people have a short attention span, so they're not going to watch some of the more in-depth pieces that you do. I think they will, and we find that they may not engage with it on TV. It may be on, when they go to YouTube, perhaps, but there's still value in going deep with your reporting. And so can you capture everything the way that I think you're suggesting? How can we continue to bring this thoughtful sort of in-depth to everything that we do in our local market? You can't always do that with everything, but you have to be deliberate in making sure that in certain kinds of stories, you do spend the time and invest in doing this kind of coverage.
Hey, Sean, how do you define local, and is there a way for TV to get down to that hyperlocal level?
Oh, I mean, we started, 15 minutes ago, we were talking about trust. There was a session earlier in this about trust, and one of the things we know is the reason people do have a little more trust in local than national is the accessibility. I see it. I run into those people from time to time. And so I argue, and this is really challenging from the business side of things, we need to be more local now than we've ever been. And we have a business problem. I mentioned when we were talking about this the other day, it may cost $10 million to run a TV newsroom. So multiply that times 5. And that probably, and I spent the last 11 years going from newsroom to newsroom to newsroom, city to city to city. So I've seen enough of this where I feel confident in saying this is a fact. You can walk into a newsroom that even still has maybe 75 or 80 people in it, and there's 4 dayside reporters. That's not enough. So what we need to be doing is recalibrating so that we can get deeper into the communities. Because the number one thing I argue that's missing in local news is expertise. And I mean real expertise, where it's not just here's the rundown of things going on, but here's what it means and here's why it's happening, and here are possible solutions. Then beyond that, I think one untapped opportunity. There's always been an arrogance in local news. It has to come from us. And I think we've missed partnership opportunities. And I think, in the world of broadcast and public license and the greater good, I wonder if we can tap into some of these organizations that are in communities all across the country that do awesome journalism and have no voice. I think through those two things, I think we can be more local than we've ever been, more relevant than we've ever been. Because to the point you're bringing up, we have to be in depth. I mean, we have to, if it's just a rundown of here are the 10 crimes that happened today, we're going nowhere. And the audience is complicated because we do have people in their 20s who prefer this. But to the point you brought up earlier, we still live off people in their 60s and 70s. I mean, that's what, all we have left at scale. So we have to find products and stories that work for them too. Altogether, it has to be through the storytelling. But we have to have enough stories to choose from to adequately cover the need and to fill the large number of platforms and places we distribute content every day. Right now, that's not happening. And the number one challenge in local newsrooms that I see, reporters, there's not enough of them, and they don't have enough time to do quality journalism.
Evie, Ellen is the co-founder of a hyperlocal nonprofit called Brookline.News. Can you see GBH perhaps partnering with Brookline.News on some of these things, as Sean suggests?
You know, I think every story starts somewhere. So it's, I would never say that, when you watch national news, those stories aren't all happening in some national place, everywhere at once. Like everything starts somewhere local. So I don't come from the editorial. I look at some stat that we know that our second largest audience for PBS is on YouTube. And we had a viral hit last year in GBH News about Judith who lives in her car. And the viral hit was not everyone from Boston. It was a very small percentage of the audience was local. So I think this is what's happening, is that people are finding the stories in different places. And so we're not thinking about how to super serve the Brookline audience. We're saying, what's that story that's going to hit, that's going to appeal resonate more with a lot of other people. So there could be a story in Framingham, where I live, or in Brookline, where you live, that is appealing to across the state and across the country even. But you're asking a question about how do we dig in deeper to hold people accountable, right? Which is what really what our job is, right? And I think that's the story, is where are the stories that that matter, that we need to tell, And I think that's what's really hard about journalism today, with the closing of all the newspapers, is that there's a responsibility on the people that are surviving to tell all of these stories. And so then you have to make some hard decisions about what you're telling. Now, the good news is that the internet is unlimited. There's not only 60 minutes to tell the news, or 30 minutes. So you can figure out how to tell these stories over time, longer, shorter, audio, video, and that is what we have to figure out, is where is the platform to tell the story to be engaging.
One thing I will add, though, with the partnerships, that is something that we have talked a lot about and had meetings on with other smaller news organizations. What are some areas that they're covering that, instead of having to duplicate it or to ramp up the staff, and in some cases you can't, obviously in the climate that we're in. So one of the best ways to expand your footprint is to do partnerships. So we recently started a segment on our morning program, Morning Edition, with the Boston Business Journal, where on Fridays they wrap up the 3 big stories of the week, right? We don't have a dedicated business reporter, but now we have someone who can capture that for us. At The World, we recently did a partnership with Deutsche Welle, DW, the German broadcaster. And this allows us, it's a content swap. So they use our pieces and we get access to their pieces. We can only cover the world with so many people, but if we have Deutsche Welle with reporters in other parts of the world, then we can cover more of it without investing heavy dollars into it. And we've looked at other areas. We have another partnership with the Out of Eden Walk, which is part of National Geographic, which is an ABC-owned product. And we have twice a month we do this extended segment with them. So I do think that one way for us to not only cover more within our communities, but even move beyond that and really offer that in-depth and some of the quick hit news without having to invest in the infrastructure. And what I mean by that is hiring a lot of people to be able to do it, is through partnerships.
Before I turn it over to Ellen, Sean, you're the one who brought up partnerships. So your station's doing these kinds of partnerships at all, and what do those look like?
We pilot them. There's a lot of complexity. And it's even interesting. I've worked for companies over the years where we own properties inside a market, and getting TV and radio stations in the same ownership group to work together. There's just these really weird barriers that exist. And I think it's a different time now, and I think there's going to be consolidation and change in the industry that forces a lot of that to happen. everybody, it's hard to unite people around the same interest. And when you talk about like the consumption on different platforms, what I would argue is when you add them all up, I don't know if it's way different than it's ever been. Like how many people come in contact with our journalism. The difference is in most markets that I deal with, about 2/3 of the audience that views us we're not getting compensated for at all, or we're getting compensated this much. And so I think the key to any sort of smart partnership, and this is not where I've gotten anywhere yet, is how do we find ways where we're able to drive enough revenue to protect the resources, protect what we have, which is probably about 25 or 30% less than the industry had 10 years ago. So that's the tricky part, is finding that having the same goals and finding ways where everybody walks away feeling like from a financial situation, they're in a better position.
And that's why we do the content swap thing, which works really well. So they want to get, Deutsche Welle wants to have more of a presence here in North America, so they look to our pieces to feed that, and we get pieces from them. So it's not a financial agreement, it's a content swap, and those work really well.
You've all talked about the importance of storytelling, reporting, content. As you experiment with new platforms, new formats, that requires training and equipment. How do you harmonize the technology with the journalism? Does one take away from the other? Dan, do you want to?
There is training that takes place, right? So there are a lot of things. Poynter offers different. We're sending one of our editors who is moving into doing more on the video side of things to a session at Poynter down in St. Pete, Florida. So there's some of that, but it's amazing if you have ongoing conversations. So at GBH, for example, we have these performance conversations, these goals, everybody sets goals, and then you have to have these check-ins with people. And part of that is to really understand how do people feel about what they're doing and what else do they want to do? And if you have ongoing conversations, sometimes you uncover skills that you didn't know existed in your newsroom. And so in that conversation, you find out, I actually have been doing video editing on the side. So if an opportunity really, I didn't know that. I thought you were, always wanting to move up to this thing. So we have a lot of skilled journalists internally who can help us move into some of these new things that we're trying. But yeah, I mean, if you want to do it very quickly, it requires big investment, and often that doesn't exist. So I think that is certainly a challenge.
I think, what I've seen, one good thing is people coming in have training in different kinds of things now than they've ever had before. They know how to edit and do things graphically that, newsroom veterans just don't know how to do. So that's been a positive. What I find that we end up devoting the most training time to is basic stuff. We have people coming into newsrooms who just aren't prepared for what they're dealing with. There's fundamentals around ethics and law and basic storytelling stuff. I just had a guy on my team start this week who his job is to go around and teach reporters how to report. It's how to work a beat, how to develop sources. We got to attack the front end. It's like I tell news directors, every news director in America is frustrated with what comes out of the field every day. It's like, well, we got to change the process. If you just, say a prayer in the morning and hope it gets better, it's, you're going to be disappointed every day. So, I think yes, we got to be smart about teaching the technology, and getting people comfortable. Like AI doesn't have to be a bad thing. There's a lot of things equipment-wise that are just better. But boy, we got to get better at finding stories, eliminate some of this predictability, because the number one problem I see in local news is, from a product standpoint, it's boring. It's predictable. I've seen this a million. It's a sense of deja vu every time I watch it. So we can change that, because there's not two ways to tell a story. There's hundreds of ways. And I think developing training around that is something that would pay off for every company in the business.
Yeah, we talk a lot about professional development so people can learn the various tools that they need. But to your comment, I'm thinking about a team that had an issue recently where they didn't understand about how to clear rights. So you want to put something on YouTube because, that's where people are going to see it. And so you end up having to meet with the legal department to review your all the pieces. And it's like, well, what do you mean you didn't have them cleared before you started? Well, what do you mean? I'll just claim fair use. They're like, well, that's not how it works. Like, you need to have an analysis. What analysis? I said, well, didn't you go on the wiki and look at the wiki? Why would I do that? So really interesting to think about when you think of these people that have these skills. Like, I listened to a little bit of the TikTok thing on the Washington Post. It's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. But so you walk in here with these amazing skills to be able to pump out these pieces that people are going to love, but you need some basic skills. So you have to kind of roll it back a little and start to figure out how do you get everybody with whatever that basic set really is. It's really interesting, I mean, being around for so long to think about the differences of what the tools were and are, right? And the basics, what the basics were and are.
You know, Dan, you and I have talked about GBH's success with YouTube, but that's almost old media at this point. Although I should add, I learned at one of yesterday's sessions that YouTube is still the most important digital platform for local news. But vertical video is what everybody's talking about these days. What are you doing about breaking up your content into chunks, making it available for vertical, and making sure that it's captioned so viewers don't have to listen to it while they're on public transportation, especially if they're sitting next to me?
Right. Look, YouTube has been around for a while, but I don't know that it's that old in terms of how we are engaging with it. And I think that there is still a lot of...
Well, what I like about it is I can project it to our TV and watch.
Well, you can do it however you want to, right? It's on demand. No, but you know, a lot of people do still, young people in particular, that's where they go to watch news segments or to listen to podcasts, listen to podcasts on YouTube. So I still think that there is, while YouTube, again, it's been here for a little bit, but I still think that there's a lot of upside, and that's something we are spending a lot of time in the YouTube world. I'll give you an example. So we have this new show that launched. It launched on YouTube first. It's called GBH News Rooted. It used to be called Basic Black. It focuses on the Black community in Boston and beyond, and the diaspora community. And so, you know, it was on TV before. We gave it a pause, reimagined how we were going to do that show in the future, and then launched the show on YouTube. Now, we didn't launch the show as you would think of it, where it's like a half-hour show with an open and all the different segments. We just started dropping segments on YouTube because we wanted to see how these pieces, even before we put it on TV, would resonate. And a funny thing happened. We started getting people interested in those videos. And one of the more recent ones we had, within four or 5 days, we had 500,000 people who had watched that video. But the part that I really liked is that we had something like 14,000 likes on that video, and then I don't know where it finally settled, but maybe 4,000 or 5,000 comments. So there's, not only are we putting the information out there, but there's real engagement that's happening. And then I took a look at the metrics afterwards, and I could tell, you know, it's this larger percentage of young people watching it, and you know, here are the places that they were watching it from, here's how much time they spent watching it. I'm getting all this rich information that it's harder to get that kind of detail on TV. And then what are we going to do now? Well, on April 8th, we're going to assemble some of those pieces, have some new pieces, and it's going to be a show on TV. I've never done that before. I've never seen a launch. Throw pieces on YouTube, label them, come up with a name for the program. It was harder than that, but you know, come up with a name for the program and then glue it all together and put it on TV. But that's where it's at. And it's not just, you talk about vertical video, it's anything that we have, whether it's audio or whether it's a vertical video, short form, long form show, all of it can live on YouTube, and we're finding success across all platforms. And one final thing I'll say is that how we think about it is that when we have a story, so for example, it was the mayor's State of the State address this week, we don't say, okay, we're going to cover it for radio, or we're going to cover it for digital. No, we say, okay, this part of it can be on radio, and this part of it, we should treat it this way on digital, and then we're going to do a short video on social. We look at all of those things together, not just do the one thing and then just piece it off to other things. There's a strategy around all our coverage across all the platforms that we have.
I think the part you mentioned about the data is probably my favorite part about YouTube, is because we are starved for, even when you look at rating, I don't know what's going on. I mean, I run the news division. I have no idea, because the numbers that come back are so bad they almost don't make sense anymore. But on YouTube, you can test things, you can A/B test things. Is this approach or that approach? But the YouTube, what we've learned, it changes all the time, right? So I mean, now we know live coverage of things, live weather, those kind of things are huge opportunities on YouTube. Here's what scares me about YouTube. I feel like and this is where I'm going to sound a little negative. We fell for this once before with Facebook. It was a great tool. Hey, Facebook was in. We want local news, and man, we developed a bunch of products and resources, and it was great for us. Then YouTube changed their mind. They changed their algorithm. They changed their business strategy. We have no say in the YouTube business rules. And so right now, we're in a situation where we get some monetization and there's some incentivization to do it, and there's huge audience there, right? So we kind of have to be there. What I think makes this complicated, and what I think is one of the key things to think about in terms of the future of local news, we can't continue producing product for more and more and more places. I mean, one of the things that I see going forward is, I call it a one-stream strategy. I think we need to begin, because right now we produce a digital stream, we produce a linear TV stream, we produce digital, we do things for YouTube. It's all got to merge into one stream of content that meets the needs of audiences on all platforms. Now, there's audience differences, right? From a technological standpoint, I think we'll eventually be able to, in an automated way, splice content into shorter versions and longer versions. But what I see happening in newsrooms is people just killing themselves to try to meet all these different distribution points that are all different. And it can't be, and this is the fatal mistake, your grandparents' 6 o'clock news that we produce and distribute that, because that's going to fail everywhere. And so it is this sort of reinvention of the approach to telling stories and how we package content in a way that distributes better on a lot of different platforms. Because again, what I look at, time is the enemy of good journalism. The more time we can allow our reporters and photographers in the field doing the story, and the less time distributing, the better I think we're all going to be. But that involves a philosophical change to how we look at TV newscasts and how we view live elements, and those sorts of things, which right now is not at all conducive to the demands of audiences on YouTube or any other platform.
Evie, you were in the Washington Post TikTok session. What thoughts do you have about vertical video as an outlet for public?
Well, they've been doing exactly what we've been talking about, which is experimenting with look and feel and style and graphics, and I think that's what really came out of the pieces that I saw. They were faster than I've used to seeing on my own feeds, and they were, really, really interesting because they were different, and I could see the appeal of that, and the people understand how to use all the tools. I'll say that the reason why YouTube is so successful is because of connected television, Dan. So it's not just you. More people are watching YouTube on their televisions now than they are on their phone. That was a recent stat. So, it really kind of shocked everybody. But, the experimentation is so important because you really don't know what people are going to like. And so we have been trying to figure out also a business model on YouTube that's really, really hard. And we've been working with the people at YouTube to sort of look at our public media model and business model and to figure out whether there's a way to make it work. And they don't really like to make exceptions, even though obviously their technology could do anything they want it to. So I think that's part of the issue. But one other thing I'll raise is that if you look at the music industry, which used to be based on albums and then became single hits, I think that there's a way that they've reinvented themselves and started growing again. And we looked at this data years ago to see that might happen with television, where you take a television show, and if you think of it the way Dan and Sean are talking about, individual items are what people are watching. And so those individual items that appear in all these different places added up become what's happening to the music industry now. And they're successful, and the question is whether we can repackage things in these different ways so that there's two income streams. One comes from this individual content that may or may not find a way, but it's the brands too. So Nova, GBH News, Frontline, GBH Kids, those brands are going to be the ones that attract different revenue, whether it's from partnerships or whether it's from other things we don't know yet. So that's our dilemma, is figuring out how to be everywhere and also afford it.
If I could just to the workflow thing, which obviously it's complicated because when you're asking people to feed more things, then they have to do more things, right? They don't just go out and do their radio piece. They also have to be carrying their camera in order to shoot it. But there are ways for you to think about the workflow. For example, we have the Jim and Marjorie show, which is quite popular on GBH. It's a radio show, but we have outfitted their studio with cameras. And then there is, there is a producer there, and whenever there's something interesting that happens, they'll knife out some clips, and they will send that to the person who deals with our web and our digital assets. And so something will be done with that, and then they'll also clip out some audio out of some of the, if there's news that's made on the show. So within the context of just the typical workflow, if you have fixed cameras there already getting the video, you're not bringing in a crew and how are we going to do this? Stuff is happening in real time so that all of those things we've talked about can be fed without an additional amount of labor to make it happen. It's not one for one. It's not clean, but you aren't having to hire a bunch more people in order to reach different platforms at one time.
One other thing along the same line that I've had some success getting people to think about differently, every story has a best way to tell it. And if a vertical video is the best way to tell the story, why can't that air on TV? People are savvy enough to understand. It's like, and I remember our station in Detroit did this really good, it was a sidebar to a story, and the reporter did a great vertical video. I'm like, put that on the 11 o'clock news. Oh, we can't do that. Well, why can't we do that? That's just old thinking. No, the phones are gonna ring off the hook? I mean, so my part of it is just really being smart about, what's the best way to do it, and be thinking about how can we produce it in a way that works on the most touch points as we work to kind of streamline our technology and workflow.
And I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions.
Well, why don't, I think that.
So I'll ask one more question.
And then we'll open it up.
Okay. I got this from Brandeis, my friend in the front row. A Pew survey of 10,000 Americans in the summer of 2024 found that about 1 in 5 U.S. adults say they regularly get news from news influencers on social media. And that goes way up from 18 to 29, goes up to 37% get news from influencers. Can you talk a little about the challenges that fragmentation poses? Walter Cronkite had an audience of up to 29 million viewers for his nightly news. Arguably, that helped end the Vietnam War. So will there ever be a Walter Cronkite on social media, and can there be?
Joe Rogan.
There will be a lot of them. I mean, you have influencers, and I think this is both good and bad. Right, because I have two children, and one of them is a news hound, and he often will find out about things that are happening before I do. In fact, when I woke up yesterday morning, before I even had a chance to read in, he said, "Did you hear what's happening with the airport shut down in London?" And I'm like, no, not yet, because he follows this person who basically is following breaking news and will just put it out there. And you have some influencers. There's this one lady, I don't remember her name, young lady, she has millions of people following her. She just reads from the New York Times. That's it. She reads from the New York Times, and then often will add a little bit of her own commentary to it. So it's good in that it is, we are not just having a society where the only place for you to get news and information is in these 3 places, right? At the Walter Cronkite, 6:30 in the evening, right? It's not like that. It's happening in real time, all the time, and they may not give it to you in depth, or they may. I mean, there's one guy out there who goes out, he doesn't have a journalism background, but he goes out and he does these investigative pieces, and I watch them, and they're good. He goes and finds documents, and he digs them up, and he quotes documents and sources it and all that. He's not a journalist as we would think it, and has millions of people following his content. That's the good part. The bad part is there's a lot of garbage that people put up, and some of that is just to get more people to click on it. And so the challenge is, how do you live in a world where young people are exposed every day to both the good and the bad, except it's relentless. it's 24/7, and you have no control over it.
You know, I think a lot of this for me centers around what is an influencer. And I think about the antiquated news anchor that is in so many news products who, are prompter readers. And I get in trouble on these comments sometimes, but I'll be honest, but a lot of, yeah, right? Well, but these are people who historically, local news has paid a lot of money to be the face of our brands. Well, when I'm involved in a lot of research and focus groups, and I talk to anybody under 40, they just don't see the value there anymore. And I think about when I watch coverage of news, how often do I see that anchor providing any sort of context or perspective, or what's that mean? And then I think about, when you think about influencers, what is that about? Well, it's about personality, it's about intelligence, it's about connection. Why can't the news anchor be an influencer of some kind? Again, redefine that role into something that's more connected, intelligent, authentic, and available, versus somebody who plunks down at a anchor desk and reads a teleprompter for 2 hours a day and gets paid 4 times more money at least than most reporters in the newsroom. That model's got to get blown up, and I think there's a huge opportunity for us in this space to redefine the faces of our brand that have a little bit more of an influencer type feel to it. And again, I think people are also, I sense, in a lot of the data I look at, even young people, they recognize the garbage, and they do get frustrated by it. And there are times, and this is one of the biggest opportunities I see, people still do come to the legacy brands when big things happen because they want to make sure it's right. So there is still that little piece, and I think that's the opening for us to redefine some of these key legacy elements, position them differently for the future, not the past, and then we can have the guardrails. Because again, if you can modernize the journalism and the approach and be able to bank on the fact that what we're telling people is accurate and true and get people to understand that, I think there's tremendous upside and value there. But again, it just involves blowing up a lot of the system that's out there right now, which makes everybody uncomfortable.
It is a lot about trust. I mean, PBS is the most trusted brand, so we have to retain that. And when we think about influencers, we think about science or content experts in their field. And that's how I'm trying to work with the units. I'm trying to say to them, you're not going to go get a influencer who's talking about beauty for your brand. So what are you going to get? Who are you going to get? And how can you think about that? Can talk about what science matters to you for Nova or for Frontline, some investigative reporter, and think of those people that are out there talking about your brand in a way that is influency. I mean, it sounds kind of weird, but it's just a sort of matter of turning it on its head and thinking a little differently.
That one down, I'm using that.
Yeah, I mean, the world is upside down, so we do have to figure it out, and the other thing is to be more transparent with people about the news, so like Frontline has something called the Transparency Project, where they put full interviews on their website, and that has led them to have a lot of trust with their audiences because they're not afraid to show the full interview. So, I wonder a lot about that we could be doing that more with our newsrooms. So we want to stream our, like Dan said about the cameras in the newsroom, but we can't stream Morning Edition because we didn't create that. So what would you have during those hours of Morning Edition in between the news reports that you were interested in? Maybe you have a full interview that you stream. I don't know, but this is what we have to start thinking differently about, is that how are we going to really appeal to people with the kind of content that we have, especially content that we own, that we could be doing more with.
Okay. Ellen and I could keep going all day, but we would love to hear what's on your mind. So if you've got a question, just raise your hand and we'll recognize you. And yes, right over here.
Hi, I'm just wondering, we've been talking about the future, and I want to invite you to look in the past. This is aptly named Crossroads session, and we're at a crossroads in our industry, and the data from Seth Geiger would indicate how this particular crossroads is maybe unique from other crossroads that we have encountered in journalism broadly and broadcast journalism in particular. Given that you all have leadership expertise and a lot of experience in the field, looking at past crossroads for the industry, are there lessons learned from those points of time that you are applying or think we should apply to this crossroad?
I'll start that one. I think, first of all, this is unlike any period. Same thing, I've been doing this 30 years, which every time I throw that number out, it's just like, God, what happened? But I think about usually when we've hit economic things. It's about getting through something. How do we do something, the recession? I was a news director in St. Louis during the recession. It was the most awful period, literally weekly. I remember a meeting where literally I was working for a company called Belo at the time that owned newspapers and TV stations. We were on a call with the CEO. She's like, we think we're going to be bankrupt by next week. If you don't need it to get news on the air, it's got to be off the payroll by Friday. I'm like, good God, what's happening? But even then, you knew you had to get to the other side of something. This is different than that, because this is like, it's a one-way path, right? This is the first time you can unequivocally say all revenue streams are declining. And there's a direct correlation between the revenue stream and the amount of resource that's devoted to the staff inside the newsroom. And so what's happening right now is this perpetual cost cutting. If cutting without a strategy is the newspaper, and you can only do that so long, and it's just the death spiral. The product gets worse, and so fewer people watch, and then the revenue, so we got to break out of that. So that all sounds like, okay, we're going to pass out the razor blades now. That's not it. But it does point to the fact, like, we gotta move fast. And this is something, I'll speak for the newsrooms I deal with. Newsrooms are not used to having to move fast. And people struggle with, there's these legacy things. You can't mess with the 6 o'clock news. Oh my God, it's gotta look like this, and we need a man and a woman, and it's gotta be, and it's like, but the audience is leaving. And so I think, the urgency, unlike any other time in the past, I got called into a meeting 2 months ago. Project out the business 5 years. Like, that is mathematically impossible. Nobody would like what I present in that meeting. Because, again, back to the newsrooms costing $10 million, there's no way we can afford those. And so I think this is a point in time. And I think, but I will say on the optimistic side, I'm on the RTDNA board, which is News Directors Association. And I was at a meeting in December. And for the first time, this was really significant to me, everybody finally saw it. There was no longer debate about, God, how do we change? Do we need to change? What do we do? Everybody finally saw, holy cow, we got to get moving. So I know that feels negative. I think there's opportunity on the other side of this, because again, I've never talked to anybody, including the ages of people, every one of you in this room, in any of the research I've done, say, hey, do you care what's happening where you live? And the answer is no. The problem is where we put it, how we package it, the way we tell it, where it's available, and how we monetize it. Those are all solvable things. They're just not solvable through the paradigms that we've been operating under, which fundamentally haven't changed very much since the 1970s.
A couple of things I'll say is, you said looking to the past and what have we learned, and I look back to, I participated in one of the early uses of the iPhone. It was handed out, I still have it, by the way, but it's not worth anything because it was used. If it was in this package, I opened the box, right. We used it, and here's what we used it for. We had this guy who was Mr. Techie, and he was tied into that tech world. And we used it to be able to, when we were out doing campaign coverage, they put an app on it, and it would just follow me around as I was going around the campaign. And then when we would open the broadcast, it would show this line, and it would say, Dan Lothian's been covering all over the state, and that's all it was. It was a tracking app. And they had somebody who was talking to us about it, and I said, so what are we going to do with this thing? And they go, oh, well, it's going to have apps that will do all of these things. And I said, and who's going to make the apps? And he said, well, there'll be people who develop the apps. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. Like, what is this thing? I don't even know what an app is, right? It was hard. And there was only one thing that they put on my phone. So it made no sense whatsoever. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing was, I remember when I was covering the White House and the Twitter thing, I did one of the first national stories on Twitter, actually. It was right before the White House, actually. And it was still, there was no use for Twitter. And some could argue there's no use for it now. But it was just this thing that the story I did was that this, people would use it to go to, like, you could go to a bar and you could somehow like connect with people through Twitter. And there was this desktop thing, and this guy would go, look, there's someone sending a tweet from this country. There's no value to it whatsoever. And I wish I had invested in Twitter at the time. But it was this technology that had no use for it. Then later I'm at the White House, and they're telling us you have to tweet. And it's like, we don't have time for this. Like, I have to do no, you need to do that. And at the time, it was just like, promote your piece of what's going to be on that day. So I give those two examples as to how I was looking at this technology and saying, what do I need an iPhone for? Who's going to develop apps for this thing? What are apps? Why do I need to tweet? Why do you need to go to a bar and hook up with someone through this thing. Just walk into a bar and talk to somebody. And we see where an iPhone is now, and it's more powerful than all of the things that we have combined throughout history is on this one thing. And it's not just Twitter, but it's all these other things. Now it's X and everything else that goes with it. And so what I learned is that you have to move out of your comfort zone. You can't hang on to the formula that you've always been accustomed. That's the easy thing to do. The hard thing is to say, there's something new. I don't know how to use it. Let's work with it. Let's figure it out. It may or may not work, but don't worry, something new is going to come along and jump on that. The YouTube, that worries me too. Everything goes on YouTube and they shut it down. Then we're done with it. But what's the option, right? We have to work with YouTube, and if they shut down YouTube, there'll be AI tube or something else, and we'll jump on that. So you have to always move beyond what's comfortable, and you can't ignore technology and the speed at which we're moving forward, because you do so at your own peril.
Yeah, I think that's the point. Everything's repeating, but it's much faster, right? So I went to the first computer law conference in Silicon Valley and got a job at an educational software company. And when I left to take the job at GBH, I said, I'm done with computers. I'm now going to be in television and radio my whole life. And they were like, oh, congratulations, that's great. And within a year, I was like, Evie, there's this thing called the internet. We don't know what it is. Can you figure it out? And I said, oh, I think I know what software is now, because for 3 years I was asking my colleagues, what's software? What's hardware? So I think that was the beginning of my career. And I came to GBH, and the shows didn't have a copyright notice on them. Like, it was just crazy. But now when you then look forward and you think about all of these people that were coming out of MIT and Hugsy and which is the Graduate School of Education at Harvard, they were learning all these new interactive tools, and they wanted to do interactive media. And the first thing was Nova was going to go to shoot the VR, virtual reality. It wasn't called virtual reality, it was something else, VR. I don't know what it stood for then. And they were going to go to shoot the pyramids, and they wanted to make an interactive module out of it on PBS's website. And it was like, well, what are the rights? Or how do you create this? So we made it up. We made it up. We're still making it up. We still don't know, what we're doing. And then we did something with Apple Television. I found this contract. It's sitting on my desk. It's 20 years old, okay? We did Apple Television. We only had rights in our local media. We couldn't use any of our national shows, but it was streaming media. Somebody in our company invented the stream of our broadcasts on a computer, no laptops, no iPads at the time, and we had to shut it down because we didn't have the rights to do it. So these are things that have been around for a long time. Like, I can't tell you about the many things that MIT would come over and show us, and we'd say, well, how do we use it? Like, we don't know what to do with it. But the wild call was that I had with someone who runs a FAST network, and they would tell me, like, oh my God, it's linear television, and there's commercials, and oh, you can get so many of these. And I said, is this woman dreaming? Like, this is what we grew up with. She was for real. Like, everything comes around and goes around. So, I mean, my advice to everybody that's in this field is just thinking about what you have in your toolkit, in your experience, and just reinventing it as you see things change. Because it all is building on each other. There is really, what's new is the technology, right? But the AI is just, it's faster, but it was so much like when the internet first came up. And, you could do a Google search and no one knew what a Google search was, right? And SEO is now like, we live and breathe it, right, all the time. So it's not really that hard, like when you want to decipher that part, I think.
Yes.
Hi, thank you all so much. This has been really interesting. I had a bit of a two-parter question about revenue. So I work with a lot of media companies and nonprofits and public radio, and they have a large membership base. Most of them are older. Are there concerns with kind of this non-linear way people are engaging with news that in the future maybe these audiences that are now 20 or 30 years old won't donate when they kind of become that age? And then secondly, how are you all thinking about monetizing non-linear video in the present?
Can I read you the paragraph I wrote? So we we realize that our largest source of funding is our members. So that's definitely important for us. And we also know that younger people think differently, exactly what you're saying. They're not going to join a membership organization. You know, they want to be part of a movement. They want to be part of something that's exciting. They give to a genre. They give to a cause, right? And so we have to think differently about it. So what we've been doing is we've been playing around on YouTube with super thanks and with channel membership, and with doing fundraising videos with calls to action. Now, we also are realizing that you need to get people's email addresses because you have to draw them over to our website where we could really engage with them. So we're trying to figure out really interesting ways of getting people to sign up for newsletters. So we work with another station in New York, and they've been doing some live conversations on YouTube where in order to get, and then they're flashing on the screen all the time, you know, join, sign up here, sign up for our newsletters, and they're getting people that are interested in doing that. But the experimentation about the revenue is really, really hard because for us, for our corporate sponsors, for example, they don't buy ads. We don't give money to YouTube, so it's because we don't take ads. So it's really a challenge in figuring out how to make all of that work. But I think you're onto something, which is that we have to reinvent the way that we interact with people so that they want to give us money and help support the news and help support the other programming.
It's interesting because, you know, all of our stations are commercial television stations, so we don't have that. But interestingly, when I talk to reporters, and I made this statement probably for the first time 3 months ago, I think we do need to move to a direct-to-consumer business model. All revenue streams we have got to come up with something. There's a lot of pieces that have to fall into place for that. But I mean, I think a couple things, and again, this is an idea I think in the local television news, like commercial television business has largely been, people dabbled in this 10 years ago, it didn't work, so it can never work. I think it's changed. Most people in this room probably pay for content, you know, but you would never right now pay for local TV content for 2 reasons. Number one, I can get it in 6 places. Why would I pay 1 for it? And number 2, it's just not good enough. There's the problem and the opportunity. And so I think for us, I think we're going to go through, I think in the next 24 to 36 months, the biggest consolidation of in the local news, in the history of local news. I think probably 25 to 30% of local newsrooms will either close, merge, consolidate because of ownership changes that are likely to play out due to deregulation. So that will take care of the scarcity issue, right? So there'll be now fewer newsrooms in the market. Not all owners of TV companies are the same. There are a couple journalistic-focused companies left, and there's a lot that aren't. And I think for the ones that really do see the value of local journalism, I do think if you're able to develop a superior product where it's content that's worthwhile and I only can get it from you, I do think there's a direct-to-consumer model. We need that. But the pressure this puts on the local news ecosystem, and again, the line I use with news directors now, are you, at the end of the morning meeting, is this content anybody would pay for? And be honest with yourself. Oh, of course they would pay for that city council. Absolutely no, they won't. You know, that's a high burden. And for reporters, hey, if you're going out and doing a story, is it good enough? Did you put enough into it? Did you dig up enough? Did you uncover enough that somebody would plunk down $3 or $5 a month or whatever? That's the bar we have to aspire toward. And again, I look at that as one of the things I say I'm kind of short-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic. I think it's because of that opportunity.
Sean, do you think that depends on the health of the legacy newspaper? And the reason I say that is there are a few cities, not very many, where the legacy newspaper is doing quite well by charging for content and they're putting out a superior product. We're fortunate in Boston that the Globe is doing that.
The ones who develop, this is like when you talk about kind of back what we've learned from the past. I think local TV is not the first one to go through this, right? And to your point, look at the newspaper industry. Why have some done okay and others have just withered on the vine? Some invested in the journalism and some didn't. And again, there's more to it than that. But again, at the end of the day, nobody's going to pay for it just because it's there. They will pay for it if there's value in it. Again, it's the only place I can get it and it's meaningful. You know, it's interesting. I always talk about this in Maine. So I vacation, you know, I want to retire in Maine. I've always been interested there, and as you guys all probably know, there's a news problem in Maine. You can't get a lot of content out of there. I pay for the local, I pay because I'm interested in rules around vacation rentals and some things like that. And it's one of the things, I think I subscribed for it 3 years ago. I probably hardly, but I pay for it. But it's like, it has value to me, and there's nowhere else I can get that information. And I think, again, to your point on newspapers, there's so many lessons there that if we're smart, and opportunistic and aggressive now about it, I think it can really, somebody's going to make, not everybody agrees with this. Local journalism still can be a good business. I don't know that it supports $10 million newsrooms. I know it doesn't support 5 of them. But I think for the ones who are smart and savvy and aggressive now in fixing this, I think there's still a lucrative business that at least gets me to retirement. Maybe a little longer.
Revenue just has to be something you think about all the time, even in public media, right? The way that we have for all these years been able to rely on donations or grants and so forth, we just can't just sit back and say that's how it's going to be in the future. And so, I don't have the answer. We're experimenting with a lot of different things. But I do believe at the end of the day, if you have good content, to what has been said here, you have something that's different and special, and then you connect not the anchor who's sitting there, just reading something, but there's something that the audience relates to, they'll pay for anything, right? So I think a lot about how we can do more in-person events and what can we do? Like, let's go out. It builds trust, first of all, the closer we are to the public. Let's have conversations around this big trip and special that we did, and people are going to ask questions, right? And maybe you charge for those kinds of things. Maybe you travel around the country with your team and do some of that. In the back of my mind is this guy. I brought him up a couple of times lately. And his name is Cletus McFarlane. And he's a guy who has he has T-shirts and he rips off, the sleeves. And he started as a 12-year-old shooting videos of his remote control things. And he has millions of followers now across multiple platforms on YouTube. And I was listening to an interview with him, and it's amazing how he has such a loyal following that he can put up a photo and put a question around it, and they'll have 2 million views, right? But what was interesting is anytime he wants to try something new, he'll say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. You guys, let me know what you think. And people are, yeah, we want to do that. Okay, it's going to cost you like $3. And he has 3 million people paying him $3. And he gets the money. And so as I'm watching that, I'm thinking, I'm using Cletus as my guiding light here to really think about, okay, it's less about begging for and saying, we need you in order to survive. And it's more about what is it that you want, you need in terms of news consumption and so forth. And what's the valuable in that we know we can produce at the highest levels. And then what are ways that we can get people to pay for or donate in order to get that. And you have to be creative now. I think survival really requires us thinking outside the box and not being handcuffed to the way that we've always done it.
Yeah, Nakia?
Thank you for this presentation. I have a ton of questions, but I won't take up everyone's time. I was mostly thinking, because I know you spoke about the consolidation, is there any way that can cause a news desert? And with the rise of those news deserts, how can we avoid polarization, practicing having trust in our news, and also making sure that we're still in efforts of building towards our democracy? I think one of the things that I'm seeing is there's probably going to be a future because we're going to continue using social media, but with those news deserts, you're going to see more correspondent influencers or news reporters that our sons and daughters and peers are just going to go to in our local communities. So I'm wondering from the business practice side, is there a chance that we're going to see more news deserts because of what's going on?
I think unfortunately, yeah, and I think here's the problem. Small market TV doesn't generate a lot of revenue. And what's happened is a lot of those stations have already been gobbled up by 1 or 2 companies that have stripped them to the parts. I call it the hollow newscast. If you flip it on, it looks and feels like the news, but suddenly you start watching the stories, you're like, wait a minute, there's nothing here. There's national stories and just really thin stories. I think as the industry consolidates, I think small markets are really going to have a problem. You might end up with one. And again, does that happen to be owned by a company that actually, gives a shit about journalism? Or is it a company that just, hey, we sell advertising, it just happens to be we own TV stations? Far greater chance it ends up in that group. And I think that's tough. I mean, I think, of the things I worry about, that's one of them. I think, I look at, it came up earlier today about what the situation with newspapers about, the responsibility and the opportunity that local newsrooms feel on the broadcast side. That's one of the downsides. In this time of misinformation and disinformation and garbage and stuff that's out there, I think in some of those places, I think you're going to have a growing number of places where it's really hard to find reputable news information. The question is it this many or this many? But I think it's going to be more places than there are today.
We have a Springfield station, so we see what it's like in small cities, and they had a mixed format radio station, classical music and news, and they had some local stuff on their television. So they stopped the local television stuff, they put on what's on PBS, and down the news, they all went all news, and they moved classical to digital only. And as a result, their audience is growing. And with news only, they could take a lot more programs from NPR, but now they're taking a lot more programs from Dan, and now they're starting to work with Dan to create more programs that will tell these local stories, but will resonate across the state. So we have an initiative called Connecting the Commonwealth, which will pick stories from Western Mass and stories from Eastern Mass that apply across the state. And we're still looking for partners because they have a local newspaper in Springfield, and they have a digital organization in Springfield that does a lot of local stuff. So I think the partnerships are really key. In Chicago, the public radio station merged with the newspaper in order to save the newspaper. So I think there's other models that are like that. That's the positive side. On the negative side, it's the revenue is really, really hard. So the Springfield station can exist because the Springfield station is part of our larger company. If it was on its own, it would have a much harder time existing on its own strictly. So that's a partnership. It exists, so it's not a new partnership, but that's what we have to be thinking about.
One thing I wonder about in this space, I think that the TV stations aren't worth what they used to be worth, and that's continuing to change. And I think there's at least the potential in some of these smaller markets where there's a return of local ownership, where local entities come together to support them. These companies have big overhead, and so I think, hey, just a local operation that support. It's not going to be like news used to be, but I think it could at least be something. So that's one thing I think could play out.
I'm glad you brought up Connecting the Commonwealth, because that is what is behind this, is to be able to cover more of the state and to go into those areas where small newspapers are disappearing, and to be able to use the resources of these three entities, GBH, CAI, and NEPM, to cover more of the state. But we also have other initiatives that we are toying with and looking for support around, which will allow us to on a rolling basis, visit communities across the state. And the idea there is less of, we're going to parachute in when there's a bad story. When there's a fire, when there's a shooting, everybody covers everywhere when there's something bad that happens. The news desert, though, exists when nothing bad has happened. What about all those other good things? Or maybe there's something less bad that's happening that needs attention, or when good things are happening, those are the things that don't get any play because there's no one going there to cover it. And so we are looking for more opportunities to go to some of these places and hear from people. What's on their minds? What are the things that they're concerned about? And what are the things that we need to be paying attention to? So it's not the answer to having a paper or a radio station or a TV station that's focused 24/7 on that particular piece of real estate. But I do think that it gives us the opportunity to think creatively about how we can go to more places beyond just our main coverage area. And GBH, I think, is in a good position, having CAI and NEPM to cover a lot of the state.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I have a question that this kind of falls into the category of how would you bring peace to the Middle East? You have 30 seconds. But let me ask each of you, how is your operation using AI now? And what do you think you're going to be doing with AI over the next year?
You want me to start? Because
Sure.
I have an answer.
Sure, go right ahead.
So I was at a conference last year in LA, and I saw some editing equipment that they're using in film studios, where somebody reads in the script, something didn't work right, and they had to, come in again, and usually they'd have to book a studio, and the woman would have to, or man would have to, come in, blah, blah, blah. But now with AI, it's really quite simple. And I thought, well, how could we use that? How could we use that? And somebody sent me a message on LinkedIn that they have developed a new animation studio, and they wanted to show us their AI tools. And we're starting to wonder whether there's a way to make kids' television programming not as expensive as it is right now, because a television show costs $10–20 million to develop, to grow it out over the years and years that kids like it. So that's one way we're using it. And the other is to start to think about ways to summarize some of the materials that you have. So we have volumes and volumes and volumes of archives in our, that have a lot of content on them. And how is there a way that Dan might be able to use them in a news story because he's covering a story about X, and we happen to cover that over the last X number of years. How can we get through the archives in a faster way than you could now automatically search? So I think we have to be looking at the tools that are there for efficiency's sake. For us, we don't let our stuff go out. It has to be used in a private network, which means that we can't let the large language models learn from our content, because then it gets out there for everybody to use. So I think that's part of it, is the security, obviously, the technology security, and also this privacy stuff. So I think there's ways that these tools are going to really help us with efficiencies, and that's what I'm excited about.
I mean, that's me. I mean, that's pretty much the same thing. The only thing I would add is that I am constantly looking for opportunities for us to be able to use AI. I'm much more comfortable having AI used for research, identifying the kinds of stories that maybe you're missing, or going through documents and finding patterns, things that otherwise it would take you weeks and months or longer to figure out. That's a place that I think it can be very valuable, but even as AI tools become more sophisticated and new things come to the market, I can see it touching every aspect of what we do.
We're using it a lot on versioning of stories. So if a reporter produces a package for TV, we have an AI tool that'll come up with a social media version, all the different, a web version, that sort of thing. So that's helping, again, with my goal of reporters need to spend as much time in the field as possible. We've had a lot of luck using it. We have a program that will go through like government meetings and come up with summaries, and sort of allows you to sort of be able to go through things, which gives some of that small town, we can maybe be in more places, cover things that we otherwise wouldn't. I'm really bullish going forward, because again, the business problem that I'm trying to solve is my goal is to double the number of reporters we have in the field in each of our properties. We can't hire any more people, right? I mean, that's just not realistic. But I think if we can utilize AI to tackle more of the producing side, that's the person who puts the newscasts together, stacks stories. I think that can be completely AI done. I think it can tap into data to be a lot more intelligent about what stories should go where based on audience trends and analytics from online versions of stories. So if we can move more roles from those kind of functions into the field, I think that's a big step in the right direction. And I don't see any reason why we can't do that within the next 12 to 24 months.
Thank you. Let's hear it for our great panel. And thank you for being a great audience.
Thanks.